All right. Hi, Tony.
How's it going?
Good. So this is Tony Hall. He is the government affairs manager at Carvana. But why I appreciate him and what I want to talk to him about today was his other role, according to LinkedIn, which is the DMV modernization advocate. And I think that is a title that holds very true with you, Tony. I know I respect your opinion, and we'll get into a little bit of your background and why that is. But you've definitely been a huge help and a resource for everybody in the titling community, I guess you can call it, on where we're going and where regulations and rules and laws and really innovation is going when it comes to modernizing DMV. So we definitely want to get into that. But before we do any of that, hopefully you can let us know about your background and then some of the stuff you're doing at Carvana right now. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I'm a senior manager in one of them in our government affairs shop at Carvana. The other government affairs senior managers or managers have regional responsibility where they handle more of the DMV relationships and the political relationships. I have a much broader scope, right? I handle everything for the entire country as it relates to a specific topic, which, as you alluded to, is modernization. And that really covers anything from what I consider relatively mundane, which is electronic signatures and trying to get push advocacy for those, all the way up to this utopian state of everything is completely electronic. There's never a piece of paperwork involved with any of the DMV processing when it comes to vehicle title and registration. Obviously, that's probably a decades-long endeavor, so probably have really good job security there. But anything that I can do and can support and collaborate with other participants in the field from the industry side to push that and try to shave off a couple of years here and there, or give a DMV the information that it needs and the persuasion and the push it needs to do these things. That's really my role, kind of in a nutshell. In terms of my background, I spent 10 and a half years. So I've been with Carvana for the last roughly year. The 10 and a half years prior to that, I spent at the Texas DMV, where I focused on a lot of these things, and I was involved with a lot of these quote unquote modernization things. Kind of built my bones with the DMV on the implementation project for Navitas. So when I say DMV, I was at the Texas DMV. And the Texas DMV implemented with the Navitas system in 2014. And that was kind of my first major project. From there, I had varying engagements and assignments as it related to the state's web dealer and web salvage projects, which for the folks that don't know what that is, that's essentially the user interface that dealers and insurance providers and some other entities can electronically process title and registration applications and submit those to the state. Texas happened to build all of that in-house. A lot of states now have similar sorts of services, whether they build them themselves or work through other industry service providers who kind of facilitate those interfaces. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my modernization background as it relates to the DMV. I've done some other things, but I won't digress too far into that.
Cool. Yeah, I have some questions about that utopian state that everybody's looking at and going towards. So I want to dive into that, and then also just your work with Navitas and how that plays into the big picture and how that's kind of pushed things along. But before we get into that, I think, for me, working with government agencies over the last decade, you get to start to know people on the other side and build relationships with them. And so I have my perspective or opinion on working with state vehicle agencies, but you have a much better perspective because you lived it. So for the 4 people that are going to listen to this recording, how could you give us some insight or maybe some big misconceptions about working for a government entity? Maybe what people might not expect, or also how that has shaped your role at Carvana and your view to the private sector. So if you can touch on those 2 things, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is really understanding the workload that government employees have, right? There's the stereotype that government employees don't do anything, that it's just always easy for them to say no, and that there are these roadblocks to trying to make progress. And to be candid, that may be the reality in some places. From personal perspective, that was not the reality, in Texas. We were always trying to push the boundaries. We were always trying to find a way to get to yes. Yes, at times you have to put your foot down and say, this is not compliant with state law or federal law. And you have that back and forth with industry, and sometimes you just have to stand your ground. We can't always bend over and just say yes to everything. DMVs also have a certain level of responsibility for, consumer protection. The extremes to which a DMV will go for consumer protection is often influenced kind of by the politics that are in that state, in terms of how heavily focused they are on that, and what those processes look like. But often the question comes up, why can't a DMV just do this, right? Why can't they just change this policy? Why can't they just build these systems? Well, legislatures allocate a certain number of employees to that state agency. They allocate a certain budget to that agency, and that may be their cap for that year or for that 2-year cycle, depending on how often the legislature convenes. Asking for more money, asking for more resources is often an uncomfortable subject to approach. So, quite frequently DMVs are in this box of, they have only so many people, so much money to do all of these things. And on top of that, you're layering that with multiple layers of priorities and complexities, right? DMVs are not only responsible for title and registration. In some states, DMVs also have driver's licensing. And there's all that identity management that goes along with somebody's driver's license and ID. They may be responsible for motor carrier functions, international registration plan. So that's your commercial motor vehicle registration. In some states, the functions are housed under the umbrella of the state police agency, right? So you have policing priorities that are competing with title and registration. And I think that's really, when you get down to the biggest misconception, that's probably the biggest misconception is like, they're not moving fast enough. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't. There's just those resource constraints that are there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mirror that same thing, because after getting to know these people and talking to different motor vehicle agencies and getting to know these people, they want to modernize. They want to move fast. They want to do all the things that everybody wants to do. But you're right, they do have certain constraints that they have to work within, and guardrails they have to work within. So yeah, I think that's an important point, because you're right. For the majority of consumers, I guess they look at DMVs as like the sloth from whatever that movie was, and they're slow and they always like to say no and no and no. But in reality, it's a good group of people that want to move things forward. You just have to do it in a more metered way than like a startup software company or something like that. But you need that as well, right? You need that person, that company pushing the limits and pushing the envelope In the past, we've definitely talked about e-signatures before, you and I have, but what, if you can explain what the difference is between e-titling and an ELT program? Because whenever somebody says ELT, we think, oh, it's electronic titles, but that's a little bit different than e-titling. So if you can break that down for everyone, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so e-titling is that term implies really the whole life cycle of vehicle ownership and the transfer of that ownership in an electronic method, right? So I can log into a system as an example and say, I have sold my vehicle to you. You can log into that system and say, yes, you have sold that vehicle to me. As part of that, you're completing the odometer disclosure process. You know, the systems know that I am who I say I am. It knows who you are. You know, in a perfect world, right? It does the fee calculations that may go along with that. I can pay my fees by credit card, or in the case I've sold my vehicle to you, you can pay your fees by credit card. It's all electronic. Like, I don't have to visit the DMV to do anything. I don't have to try to find a piece of paper to do anything. You don't have to find a piece of paper to do anything, right? We can just do that in a matter of a few seconds on our phone. And that is possible, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of like what is technologically available and feasible, that is, right? There are people can, transfer documents and information electronically today. Identity verification electronically exists today. It's just bridging all those things together. And that's what e-titling is. ELT, which is electronic lien title, or electronic lien and title, kind of depending on who you're talking to, basically means the same thing. That's one small piece of the e-titling ecosystem. That's typically the one where DMVs start. And essentially what that is after all the paper stuff has occurred and the application has been submitted to the DMV processes that application themselves. So it's still a manual physical process to some extent, or in the entire extent. And then once the DMV approves that title application and that title is approved and quote unquote issued, instead of printing that title with the lien on there and mailing it to the lien holder, the DMV stores the record electronically and sends an electronic notification, typically through a service provider, to a lien holder. And that just notifies them, here's all the title information, and your lien has been secured. And that sits there for the life of that loan. And then once that loan's paid off, the lien holder can log into their service provider system and report that lien has been satisfied. And then it'll report that information electronically back to the DMV, at which point the DMV will then remove the lien from that title, generally will then print that title and mail that title to whomever is entitled to it without that lien on there, right? So it cuts out a bunch of the paper processing where, in a traditional sense, right, the lien holder receives a title, they're storing that in a vault for 5 years, or 6 years, whatever the loan is. Then when the lien's paid off, they got to go find that title. They got to sign off on the title or print out a separate piece of paper that says the lien's been satisfied. And they got to mail that to the owner. And then if the owner wants to get a title without a lien on it, well, then they got to go to visit the DMV, pay the title application fee, and have the lien removed. Or it could be a dealer, right? A dealer's on a payoff and they're getting all this information. And now it's this extra sheet of paper because it's a lien release that's with it that they're responsible for. So ELT is a very important aspect, right? Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50-ish%, just based on my prior experience in Texas, 50-ish% of vehicles have some type of loan secured on them. So it helps keep that process electronic. It also is a savings for the state. But to your point, understanding the difference is important. Even internally, when I talk to internal stakeholders, somebody might come up and, to me within Carvana and say, hey, such and such state says they're doing e-titling or they have e-titles. And I'm like, no, that doesn't sound right. Like, what are they talking about? And then, I'll look into like, they're talking about ELT, like this is what ELT is. And it's not e-titling. ELT really isn't getting us a benefit. But that being said, a lot of times when we engage with states about, getting into the e-titling ecosphere, We typically start with encouraging them to do ELT, even though it's not a direct benefit to a company like Carvana. There are downstream benefits, plus it's that kind of that first stage, and it's building towards that life cycle, and it is an easy entry point.
I see ELT is just a part of the e-titling process. I guess the other parts would be like an EVR or an ERT solution, right? That's one other aspect. I suppose Invitas plays into that as well, just to as a national verification tool for titling. And then you mentioned the kind of the identification piece. What is that? Is that happening? Because with EVR and ERT, I mean, there's maybe 20 something states, right? 28 states or 26 or something like that. That I got to look at your Tableau again. that allow EVR, ERT. From the identification piece, are we talking about like a mobile driver license type scenario, or what does the identification piece entail?
All right, so we'll unpack that a little bit, right? So ELT is kind of the thing that happens after the title has been processed, right? So that's post-application, post-DMV processing. What EVR or ERT, which those stand for electronic vehicle registration or electronic registration and title, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. Essentially, what that is that I talked about web dealer earlier. It's that user interface that allows an entity, typically dealers, but also from time to time insurance companies, other large stakeholders, to essentially submit data and or scanned documents to the DMV in an electronic method, where they're not having to walk in that paperwork or mail that paperwork into the DMV. So they're submitting the information and the documents electronically to the state. So that's what that EVR, ERT kind of solution looks like. The identity verification piece, where that comes in, is under the federal regulations. To be a real e-title, there has to be an odometer disclosure process with that. And if you are completing that odometer disclosure process outside of a physical outside of the physical presence of a bonded person with the state, that identity has to be verified at a NIST level 2 standard, and there's a little further context for that. But that part will either have to be something that gets developed by the state, because the state's responsible for that NIST level 2 verification, or through their contractual service providers who provide these EVR services, right? And essentially what that allows is the ability for a seller to verify their identity and report that odometer, right? Absent this physical wet ink signature occurring on the odometer disclosure. And then the buyer of that vehicle, who has to acknowledge that odometer that was reported by the seller, also doing that electronically, absent some physical wet ink signature. So yeah, that would be housed in that pre-DMV kind of actually touching the title process, because that odometer disclosure acknowledgement piece has to occur before the DMV even processes that transfer. Going into a utopian state, right? Once that occurs, then really the buyer can go in there and pay their fees, and they should be done with it, because all the data is there that's necessary. You verified the identity, all the vehicle information's there. The state should be able to do most of the fee assessment calculations, and even in many states, probably registration, and the purchaser can pay for all those online. So that's kind of, I think, in a nutshell. I probably made it sound a little more convoluted, but it's even more convoluted than that, if I'm being honest. But hopefully that's chill.
No, that makes sense. But one thing, and in your opinion, I don't even know if you have an opinion on this, but a lot of times we talk about this when it comes to retail sales, right? A dealership selling vehicles, things like that. does are the same rules applied to peer-to-peer sales? Like, meaning, if I were to buy a car off Craigslist, could we, as just two consumers, create an electronic contract between each other and pay each other through PayPal or something like that? Would that,
Arizona already has a system like that in place where I, as a private person, can sell my vehicle to you. It's restricted right now to, within the state of Arizona, right? It has to be two people that have an Arizona driver's license, and you've set up your Arizona account, and you can transfer that. I mean, Arizona today does not issue paper titles, essentially, period. The only entities that they'll issue a paper title to at the time of transfer are to dealers, if dealers request it. So Arizona has e-titles in place. They've got a mechanism where dealers can take those e-titles in to their possession electronically. Or, if I'm not going to trade my vehicle in and I'm going to sell it, to a private person, I can do that all through their service. Obviously a lot of the focus, I'm on the dealer side of it, so a lot of that focus is doing e-titling and leveraging those services for the dealers. Texas has some mechanisms to do some portions of the process electronically. There are some other states that also have some electronic transfer components in there, but the primary two states really are Arizona and Texas. And to your point, Arizona does it on the private party side. Texas currently does it on the dealer side.
Got it. Cool. And when it comes to Arizona allowing it on the private party side, was that because it was kind of an easy first step for them, or is this, because it sounds like, Arizona is kind of ahead of the game in certain areas when it comes to allowing for getting closer to that utopian e-titling, solution. Is that accurate, or are there other states, like I know you said Texas, but are there other states that are kind of building up these components to get closer to that end goal?
Yeah, so I would say Arizona and Texas, kind of in parallel, really launched into true e-titling. Arizona took its approach at private party, and I'll talk about that after I kind of explain why Texas did what it did. And then Texas took the approach of going the dealer route. So Texas took the dealer route because the Texas DMV does not do driver's licensing in Texas. So we don't have access to that information for identity verification purposes, right? But we do license dealers. And so through the dealer, through Web Dealer, which is the dealer's portal to process these transfers, they have the ability to do some engagement with electronic titles. They can receive electronic titles through ELT releases. If an e-title is out there, they can assume possession of that through Web Dealer. They can also then use that e-title and transfer that e-title to a retail purchaser, and that gets submitted then to the state for the actual process, review and processing. So Texas started there because they didn't have access to the driver's license piece. And dealer transactions, make up a significant portion, probably 40-50% of all the transfers in the state of Texas. Arizona took the other approach, right? Arizona, they do have in Arizona, the DMV there, or Motor Vehicle Division, MVD there, has access to, they do driver's license as well as title and registration. So they had access to that identity verification part through people's driver's license information. So that's how they were able to set up kind of their system and their process to facilitate those e-title transfers. Both states had some NHTSA petitions that they put in place to kind of approve some of their processes. Again, that's why Texas went the route it did. Arizona went the route that it did. But both have been successful in their own right. And Arizona kind of continues to build upon that. And there's a lot of, cool things that they're working on. The same as Texas, right? Texas is constantly kind of looking at trying to evolve some of their services. to dovetail into kind of your follow-up question, there are a number of states that are looking at doing more and more e-titling things. It is a very slow process. Florida just this month, I think, have or will be this month relaunching their ELT platform, which is going to open up some abilities to do some more electronic titling related services as it intertwines with the ELT process, including transferring ELTs to another state whenever other states are ready to engage with that. Idaho is in the midst of its modernization efforts. They're trying to model as closely as possible Arizona. That's kind of the model they're looking at. And then West Virginia is in the midst of doing some really cool stuff. They're working with one of the industry service providers, Champ Titles, and they're looking at doing some really cool stuff and actually doing a digital title, which is kind of that next layer to an e-title. You can actually see the title on your phone, right? Like you can log in and you can see it, and there's a QR code that goes with it, so it can be validated. It's not just kind of sitting in the ecosphere. There's actual physical representation of it that somebody can see on their phone. And that'll start to open up a bunch of different things, and really kind of the next iteration of e-titling is state-to-state e-titling. And that's really where the long-term game comes in, is you've got to have a number of states that do e-titling, some components that can interface with each other to really do state-to-state e-titling. In my current role, I've had a number of conversations with both states, as well as with some industry partners who have those relationships with some states where I see there's the potential for doing some state-to-state e-titling, because candidly, I would love nothing more than Carvana to be able to carry that banner of we were the first true state-to-state e-title transfer. And that's my goal. My personal goal is to get us there.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like you said, ELT, it's not like Carvana uses that directly, but you're an advocate and you want to see that grow, because that's a piece to the ultimate e-titling, which will help out the industry. So from, I guess this is my little soapbox of companies, whether it's a franchise dealership or a finance company, anybody that touches vehicles on any level, title and registration is always, in the past, has been kind of an afterthought, kind of, okay, the main thing is to service the customer, get them on board or whatever, and then we'll worry about reg and title afterwards, where I think it's becoming more obvious now where the titling aspect of this has to be when considering the whole customer experience, right? From when they go on the website or when they walk into the showroom or whatever, the titling aspect of this starts at the beginning of that sale, essentially. So what do you think the biggest impact e-titling will have for your customers, for the consumer? Grand scheme of things, how is this going to help consumers? How is this going to help businesses work?
Yeah, so industry at large, whether it's new dealers, used dealers, insurance, salvage pool industry, fleet operators, financial companies, right? Everybody's trying to do as much as they can electronic, but you can do that up until you hit that point of title and registration, right? So many states still require those documents to be submitted physically, or scans of physical documents to be sent to them. Some states will still require physical copies of documents to be stored, printed and stored physically, because they don't allow electronic storage, right? So from industry perspective, obviously there's a huge benefit. From the customer perspective, right? It's and we'll use the Carvana example, right? We're doing everything online at the front of the transaction. And then you get to the point of, okay, customers either picking up or having their vehicle delivered, and then it's this, but we've got to have you sign, this document, or these 2 documents, or these 3 documents, or these 4 documents, whatever the case may be, because we have to have a wet ink signature or have to have a physical copy of it, versus, we can do an electronic copy of the document with an e-signature, right? It is not the most, customer friendly experience when you're sitting in the driveway and you're trying to have them complete paperwork, or if the paperwork has to be submitted to the state, right? You're waiting with the customer while the state reviews and approves the process before you can leave the customer's driveway, right? Hey, they're excited about this vehicle that they have. They want to get it and they want to drive it. It's like, nope, you got to wait, because we got to wait for the state to approve your paperwork first, right? So it hurts the customer experience. Getting to full e-titling, right? It just, you can seamlessly do that. You can immediately have, in a perfect world, right, all the documentation is accurate because it's all done electronically, right? It's being pulled from one record and moved to the next record, right? There's not human error of, well, let me copy this, like I got to type in this information off the prior title document, right? It's like, no, you're pulling it all over, like it's accurate and moves forward. Everything is just processed seamlessly. Obviously it's going to improve the servicing time by the DMVs. Means the customers are going to get their title issued much faster. They're going to get their permanent registration, much faster. There are folks that need these documents quickly for whatever reason. Somebody might purchase a vehicle today and they're getting, assignment to go get stationed in another country, on a military assignment next week, and they have to have all their documents to do their export, right? It alleviates a lot of these pain points on that customer service side when you're even engaging with industry. And then obviously from a private party to private party today, pretty much every state, there's, probably a couple where if I, as a private person, sell my vehicle to somebody else, one or both of us is visiting the DMV, right? And the one of the fun adages that I've heard in the past was, you pack your lunch and you bring your book and hope you don't finish both by the time you get the service that you need at the DMV, right? That is reality in some places, right? Sometimes those lines get very, very long. Anything a DMV can do to obviously remove a body from a office, right, means you're processing things that much faster. You're getting through customers that much faster. You're improving everybody's satisfaction.
Once we get to that ultimate e-titling situation, you're saying that the data will be readily available, right? There's not going to be this manual entry of, entering data off an old title, things like that. All that data will be readily accessible and verified, right? And so that will allow things to be sped up and done digitally. But I know, just working with motor vehicle agencies, that most, all DMVs are worried about data privacy, and they're worried about fraud, right? They want to reduce fraud and ensure consumer data is protected. So, what's the biggest pushback that you get, or the biggest concerns that you get from these state agencies on moving these things forward? If it's not, outside of resources, like availability of resources, or just speed, the general speed of a state agency, what are other concerns that they have that you've heard, like legitimate ones that you're like, okay, I could see that, we got to work through that?
Yeah, so to emphasize your point, right, e-titling, significantly dampens the ability to commit fraud. True e-titling, right? I'm a known person. My identity's been verified electronically through NIST level 2. Like, to bypass that should be very, very difficult. Then the same has happened with the other person involved with that transaction, right? The e-title is part of the state system, so it's like somebody can't forge that, right? You can't knock off a title. You can't use an eraser to, rub off the ink and reprint information over top of a legitimate former title document. You can't clone VINs. I mean, you're accessing the title record in the system of truth, the state system. And you have two parties whose identity is verified through the state system, right? It's not like I'm presenting a laminated piece of paper that is my driver's license to you that a college student knocks off in their dorm room probably every minute, right? You're eliminating all those points of potential fraud with true e-titling. So that's never, like, that ultimate solution, that utopian solution, is never really the concern. It's that transition between this is where we're at today and that's where we want to go, and what steps can we take to get there, because you can't have 51 jurisdictions in the US build this today and have this 100% solution in place today. There's this transition. So a lot of the conversations that I have, and a lot of the things I try to push, is let us do things like electronically captured handwritten signatures, right? Let us scan the front and the back of a title document. We will present that to the customer electronically. They can execute that document with a handwritten signature. It's electronically captured, right? It eliminates mailing that's associated with that. It eliminates the potential for that to get lost. The customer can do it in the convenience of their home before, in our case, we deliver a vehicle or they come visit us to pick it up. I think the real concern that kind of comes in with that is, how do you know that person that's actually doing that electronic signature is who they say they are? How do we know that signature was captured for that document, right? That it wasn't just a signature that got pasted on all these documents, right? At a certain point, there is some level of trust that comes into that. But when you start with licensed and regulated entities, right, such as dealers or insurance companies, right, if you're going to go down the road of committing fraud, you're not going to do it electronically, right? Because that's more costly. You're going to do the traditional manner, right? You're just going to forge somebody's signature on the paper document, which happens today. You get more security with those electronic signatures, right? Like, there's going to be IP addresses and date stamps and things like that are associated with that. That could, you can go back and audit, right? Dealers are not going to go commit fraud on electronic documents just because it doesn't make it. There's easier ways to do it. So it's like, start with the regulated industry. And let them do it, because you also have licenses you can still go after if fraud is committed. So there's recourse, there's consumer protection that's still in place for that. The other kind of pushback that I've heard, which was, candidly one that I hadn't thought of until I'd had the conversation with the state, was, well, we're looking at doing electronic signatures, but we've got these competing sort of requirements of, we do driver's license and we do title and registration, and we want to have the same signature solution in place, but whatever signature solution is in place has to comply kind of with the requirements for driver's license as well as the requirements for title and registration, because we don't want to have a bunch of solutions, and we don't want to have this like weird, customer goes in for this and they can do it this way, but they go and do that and they have to do it a completely different way. So they're looking at it from that kind of consumer ease and service kind of perspective as well. They want to have consistency where possible. Plus, nobody wants to manage multiple different services either, if you can find that commonality. So those are really kind of, I think, the more or less the pushbacks now. And then obviously there's kind of that big elephant, which is what I personally think is a lack of understanding about what the federal regulations allow with respect to electronically captured signatures on your traditional physical title documents, odometer disclosure documents today. And more than happy to talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, actually, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but if you can give a quick high level on your communication with NHTSA and kind of what is going on, and then how that has been, I wouldn't say miscommunicated, but there's varying levels of understanding across the states, right? As far as what what that means. So yeah, if you can dive into that, I think that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of context, right? So the FAST Act, I think it was back in 2011, 2012, required NHTSA to establish an electronic signature process, right? They had to amend the existing federal regulations. They finally got around to doing that in 2016. They put out proposed rules. At the time, I was at the Texas DMV, and I was in our title shop. So I got tasked with drafting the agency's formal response to those rules. And to say that we had a number of concerns probably would be an understatement. And I think we said as much in the response was, the way the rules were proposed, it was clear that the drafters of those proposed rules didn't understand how the odometer disclosure process worked, on the state side or on the industry side. So we provided a response, and part of that response included, we took the existing rules as they proposed them and literally redlined them. And then that ended up getting submitted. Again, that was all part of the work that I worked on. Obviously, there were other folks within the DMV that were part of the review process on that, and then the executive director, blessed that, and we submitted that as our formal response. It took a few more years. 2019, NHTSA comes around, and they, out of the blue, we had encouraged them to go back and have conversations with states and reopen the rules, but they turned around in 2019 and dropped the final rules, and more or less took, the Texas red line version, sans a few, recommendations. They made a few other tweaks based on some feedback, but more or less, and they said that in their response that, hey, Texas has experience with this. They provided us the red line, and they even privately told me afterwards, hey, thanks for doing this. We took most of it. So I know what the intent was because I wrote a lot of it. what's out there today. I know what the intent was and where we were trying to go with it. But when the rules got dropped, the way it reads is there are physical documents and there are electronic documents, and there are physical signatures and then electronic signatures, right? So the signature definition essentially has two components. And basically what the rule says is if it's a physical document, it has to have a signature as handwritten personally. That's all it says. It doesn't say it has to be wet ink. A signature is handwritten personally. Then it says if you have an e-title, then here are the allowances for the electronic signatures on e-titles. Well, the way states have read that is if I have a physical title document, I can't use electronic signature. But they're not understanding that the electronic signature definition applies only to an electronic title. And really there's only a couple of states that really even have an e-title that meets the definition of the federal odometer disclosure requirement. So a lot of the advocacy that I've been pushing is a handwritten signature that is captured electronically satisfies the requirement of the federal odometer disclosure, right? It is as long as it's handwritten personally, whether it's by pen on a stylus, I'm using my fingertip, I'm trying to do it with my mouse. Like as long as it's that, it's fine, right? It can't be the sound, it can't be a symbol, it can't be the auto-generated DocuSign solution, right? That's not allowed, but handwritten is allowed regardless of the method in which it's captured. So that's been a lot of I think the confusion that's come down, and where a lot of that advocacy that we've been trying to push, really stems from. On that, we've made a little bit of progress. We've had a couple of conversations with some states where they kind of acknowledge that. There are a handful of states that agree with that and already have policies in place with that solution in mind. And so that makes the conversations a little bit easier. It's like, well, it's not just me saying it. There's obviously these 6 or 8 other states out there that also run it the same way because they're allowing it. But constantly trying to have that conversation. And with respect to NHTSA, right? So all of that comes down to, I obviously feel like I have a very good understanding of what the regulations say, but that's me representing a member of regulated industry, which is going to be viewed as, well, you're trying to quote unquote, sell us on your position, and we're skeptical because that's not how we read it. So where do you go? You go to the source of truth, which is NHTSA. So what we did back in September was we submitted a lengthy, letter of interpretation request to NHTSA, which basically outlines more or less what I just kind of detailed out here, which is our position, asking them if they agree with that position, and then kind of having, I think it's roughly 8 or 10 questions that we're asking for them to respond to kind of reinforce what the allowances are and where the lines are within certain parameters, so that once, NHTSA formally responds, then there really should alleviate this uncertainty or ambiguity in how people are reading the regulations.
Got it. Cool. So the goal is, because I understand, as a vendor ourselves, as a service provider, states are always like, well, yeah, is this just for your best interest? No, this is for, this is for, the general benefit of everyone. But so going to NHTSA is a smart move, because the goal, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, is get them to put out their official clarification or word that you can then show or work with each state and point to that, rather than, hey, this is what Carvana says, this is what Yasi says, this is what we think it is, or our interpretation. It's like, no, here it is, black and white. Is that, that's it?
Yep, 100%. That's it.
Cool.
Once we get that back, I feel very confident, obviously, in what the response will be. I think they're going to agree with me. Was hoping we would have had that back by now. Still don't, but it'll be, full court press once we get that, to make sure that we're getting that out to, impacted industry, to AMVA, which, obviously is the DMV trade association, and directly to all the states, to be like, this should answer all your questions. How quickly can we move forward with, electronically captured handwritten signatures on physical documents, right? Like, we're going to scan them and do it that way.
Right. Because that wouldn't take, that's technology, obviously, that's available today that industry partners like us or Carvana could implement immediately, because it wouldn't mean that they would have to change some, state law or statute or something to accommodate. This would be more of just, hey, this is how federal law is interpreted. Okay, this is now, we will accept this, and then that could be implemented from industry providers or industry partners.
Cool. It should have no financial impact, really. Mostly, I think it would be, they obviously the DMVs would have to invest a little bit of time to review their policies and make any clarifications in policy and communicate that out to their, their staff, to their, the industries that they provide service to on here, it's allowed, you can go ahead and move forward with that. But, the DMVs don't have to program or develop anything, right? It's, if you already have an EVR, ERT solution in place, right, you're probably already getting scanned documents. It's just going to, instead of it being a scanned document with a wet ink signature, it's a scanned document with an electronically captured handwritten signature. The reality is you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference anyway. One of the questions we did ask is, if states can't accept the document electronically, can we physically print the electronically captured handwritten signature onto the documents? Assuming NHTSA says yes to that, then again, it's printed on the title document, and the state can just, it's a matter of them saying yes, right? So that was kind of the intent with the structure behind that request, and kind of where we're hoping to go with things.
I mean, you've been very helpful and vocal in pushing these things along and rallying people together to kind of move this along and add clarity and more realistic next steps on how to move towards that utopian situation. So I guess to wrap it up, give us something to be excited about, or what are you most excited about? Like, what's promising to you? I know Arizona's doing some cool things with e-titling. You talked about Texas, but in general, like, what's exciting over the next, however long, year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, that gets you, up in the morning and excited to continue to push forward on this?
to circle back on the NHTSA thing, right? It's like assuming that what I anticipate the response will be comes, and that'll probably be the first thing that comes in the short term. I sit with anticipation every day, hoping I get that email that has that letter in it, that formal response, because I think that will be game changing in the short term. So that's probably the thing that could come the soonest that excites me. I'm very intrigued by a lot of the things that are going on with West Virginia and kind of that e-title ecosystem that they're developing out there in collaboration with Champ. That there's a lot of potential there. And I alluded to us being Carvana, working with a couple of states and a service provider that has some access to a couple of other states on trying to facilitate the first state-to-state e-title transfer. The states that are involved with that, in terms of how Carvana is positioned in terms of market share in those states would be huge benefit for us just from a customer service standpoint. From a simplicity standpoint, and just the financial aspect of it too would be huge, considering we're the second largest used car dealer right now, and several of those states represent significant share for us. So that gets me excited. Candidly, I think the state-to-state thing is probably a little bit further down the road. Just you've got to get again. Governments have competing priorities, and you're not just trying to work with one. You're trying to work with 2, 3, 4, kind of in sync with one another. And it's like one can do one thing, but you got to have the other do something if there needs to be tweaks, right? So it's kind of this bouncing back and forth. So we've had some preliminary conversations. We had those last year. We've got some buy-in from the states on wanting to participate, at least 2 of the states. So that certainly excites me. And it'll be interesting to kind of see AMVA's working on an industry kind of led working group. I say it's industry led, and there's going to be an outsider that kind of comes in, a consultant that will kind of handle that. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what they come up with. I certainly have my thoughts on how e-titling from state to state will look, but that's kind of the most complex piece. So we'll see.
Cool, love it. And yeah, with West Virginia. I'm hoping, Shane, LT, if you listen to this, we want to talk to you next, because I think there's a lot of people out from the outside looking in. They're like, what is going on? What exactly is this? How is this working? How is this different? So yeah, I think everybody's excited to learn more about that. So that's it, Tony. Thank you. For anyone listening, you have to follow Tony on LinkedIn, because he's been a great resource for he's put out some tableaus that have been public tableaus, have been awesome, that show like an ELT landscape, an EVR landscape, an e-signature landscape. So anybody that's interested in this, which should be, again, anybody that's involved in any sort of vehicle retailing or financing, you should be interested in this, because it's a big part of the customer experience and the customer journey. So check that out, and he's a great resource for that. But Tony, thanks again. It was awesome talking to you, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.